Good evening, everyone, and you're listening to Toni Live, and you can't see me, and I'm going to apologise straight away because we have heavy rain here at the moment, and for some reason that keeps taking my video off. So I'm sorry, dear audience, you'll just have to put up with a photo of me for the time being. But I'm going to make the glorious Michelle Sleight talk most of this show. So, welcome back to Insight, Making Sense of Sexual Assault with Michelle. And I want to just remind you that we have our wonderful Philippines, in the Philippines, we have the wonderful Payo ready to respond to your comments, questions, and send you website links and help if you need it. On radiotoni.com, you will find all the connections to Michelle's book and her information on radiotoni.com. Michelle is an empowered survivor. She knows the difference between being empowered and just surviving. She has been the victim of 6 rapes and 1 sexual assault beginning at 5 years of age. So she's experienced all the persecution and challenges around a permanent pain-related injury. She's been stalked and powerless and lost some of her closest friends to domestic murder. Michelle now helps people to stop being at the mercy of their trauma and their triggers. She's written a best-selling book called Insight, Up Close and Personal Profile of Sexual Assault for communities to better identify sexual predators and respond in a more resourceful way to the trauma of sexual assault. So this is the third in our series of shows, and this afternoon we want to just remind everyone that the topics Michelle and I talk about are sensitive of nature. However, it's important that we have these conversations and allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to talk and connect. If these shows trigger something in you, please reach out and talk to someone about your experience and the pain that you may be experiencing. The reason we are dedicated to talking about sexual assault is that in Australia and across the world, it is a major health and welfare issue. Many victims, the effects can be wide-ranging and lifelong. You can experience physical injuries, long-term mental health impacts, and disruption to everyday activities such as eating and sleeping. According to the 2016 Australian Bureau of Statistics, almost 2 million Australian adults had experienced at least 1 sexual assault since the age of 15. More than 1.1% of Australian adults had experienced sexual assault in the 12 months before the survey, a rise of nearly 0.7%. Around 639,000 Australian women experienced their most recent incident of sexual assault perpetrated by a male in the last 10 years, and approximately 1 in 5 women in the US reported completed or attempted rape at some point in their lifetime, including completed or forced penetration, attempted or forced penetration, alcohol or drug facilitated penetration. 2.6% of US men, an estimated 2.8 million, experienced completed or attempted rape victimization in their lifetime. So the reason I quote these statistics before we start the show today is we need to know how big this issue is. And so today we're going to dabble around the concept of consent. So Michelle, would you like to start today? Welcome to the show again. Sorry, Michelle. Would you like to tell us today your understanding of consent?
Yep, sorry. Yeah, so today I've brought us outside, have a bit of a leafy atmosphere to lighten the topic. And I'm really excited to be talking about consent because it's one of the key factors in trying to solve the problem. A lot of people say it is the key factor, but it is not. It is one of the key factors in dealing with resolving or slowing down or better understanding sexual assault. And the reason why we've sort of talked a little bit about children is because consent isn't something they can give. And so we've come to the more adult part of the discussion. And it's really important that we understand what consent is and isn't. What is difficult about it is that no one seems to agree on what it is. And so, you know, there's a very big grey area. And right across the world, here in Australia, we don't have as many states as you might have in the US, and in Europe, you know, one country butts onto another. And rapists, they do cross borders. However, the law is not something that is universal. And so it creates grey areas and opportunities to get away with rape. So that is certainly something that needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed for 3 reasons. It will not reduce the amount of sexual assault because, and I'll explain this, and I know a lot of people are going, what? What is she talking about? But I will explain this. So consent is more for 3 purposes. The first purpose is so that when you're having consensual sex, you both know what the other person wants, right? So that everybody's agreeable and happy. The second purpose behind it is so that you know that you've been raped. Now, I mean, I get on a lot of websites and things, and I communicate with a lot of people. And the one thing that so many people say is, oh, my friends say I wasn't raped, but... And I have to write back and say, actually, yeah, you were raped. You were raped because, you know, you said no and he kept going. Or this happened and this happened. Or he didn't ask. And I've got to explain it all. So it's important for people to understand what consent is so that they're knowing that this is actually something that's happened, right? So that you're clear personally. The other why consent is important is for court. So when you go into a legal situation, now, we're a little different to the US here in Australia, and not a lot of people realize this, but under our system, there is no requirement to actually establish the truth. And we go in as victims of sexual assault as only a witness, and that is the same in the US. And you know, you go in as the witness to the Department of Public Prosecutors, or it's called something different in the US, but the state prosecutor. You are their witness, and that's all you are. And unfortunately, we go in and we're kind of a bit, you know, we're expecting that this is going to be the answer to actually feeling better, and it's not. And I will explain why that's not in a moment. So we go in, and then especially here in Australia, it's like, well, I didn't get to tell the truth, or I told the truth, but they shut me down, or there was this or that, I wasn't able to speak, or whatever it might be. The thing about it is that a court is really a very clinical thing, and there's no place for emotion. And we are going to do a whole topic on court. And if you go into court in the right way, you can have a very empowering outcome. I know people that have gone into court who've got a guilty verdict and still feel depressed or more depressed than they were going in, because their expectations are so high, right? So we need to understand and have a very clear definition of consent for court. So that is another place that it's very, very important. Now, it's very difficult to actually identify what consent is, as I said, because it's different everywhere. And I say to people, listen, we all have a dictionary. And in dictionaries, the meaning of consent is pretty consistent. And the other thing is that within our civil litigation system, or whenever we enter into any agreement in civil, you know, civil land type things, insurance, you know, a whole range of things, we sign a consent. So we do understand the concept of consent as an agreement. And so, you know, we could work off the principle, and in my book, I work off these principles of saying to people, you need to communicate with someone. I used to say to people, if they said, can I buy you a drink? I would say, okay, you can buy me a drink, but you have to buy my girlfriends a drink. and I'm not going to have sex with you. That's it. So that he knows up front all the information, and he can make a decision about whether he wants to spend his money buying me a drink and talking to me, knowing that the outcome is going to be what he wanted. Now, I did that growing up, and people still brought me drinks, but it was a clear understanding of the arrangements around that. And so I think that's really important, that we understand that we need to have agreement. It needs to be freely given. That's a pretty consistent theme. If you're drunk, you can't freely give. So therefore, if you're drunk, no one has the right to have sex.
You're not giving consent.
You can't, because you're impaired. And then you've got informed. Now, I was listening to a woman in the US who was talking about how if someone lies to you and misrepresents who they are, you're not informed. And if you choose to have sex with them, that's rape if they've misrepresented themselves. And I think that's a kind of... It is and it isn't, because we do have some responsibility to decide whether or not we want to have sex with someone. And if we agree, it becomes quite a little bit grey, that area. So if we're actually talking about sexual assault from the perspective of rapists, right, and not just people who are insecure about themselves, but we're talking here today about rapists. It needs to be informed. You need to be informed when you're engaging in a sexual act, right? So that you know that if you've got agreement, if you are not too drunk to be doing it, if you're knowledgeable about what's taking place, and you've decided on where you're going to go and who's going to participate, then you can enter into something and it's going to be okay, right? And you're going to know if it's not what you agreed to, that it's not what you agreed to, it's something else. And I'd like to just hear a story that's in my book, and I'd like to expand on this because I think it's very important.
Yes, so, absolutely.
Before the assault, where the chap, was visiting my flatmate and followed me into my bedroom and raped me, I dropped around to a friend's place, and I walked in. My friend was out, and her husband was there, and a whole lot of other men were there. Another friend of mine, and she was completely and utterly off her face. Not only was she drunk, but they'd been cooking up magic mushrooms. So in New Zealand, we have these mushrooms called magic mushrooms. I'm sure they're everywhere with different names. And so they had brewed up this big brew, and they had given this to her without her knowledge. So it was poured into her drink. And I literally walked in, I think, minutes before that pack rape was about to start, and apple cart, and I realized what was going on, or what was about to go on, and so I stayed for several hours, and nothing happened to me. And what's interesting here is that later on, I went and I spoke with each of these men separately, and what had happened was that there was one chap who had been in the ear of the others and saying things, right? Talking about, oh, wouldn't this be funny? Wouldn't this be hard case? Because this other woman, one they'd chosen, and this was the dialogue, and this is why I was safe. The dialogue was, she sleeps with a lot of people. She writes herself off a lot, so it won't matter to her. And this is how he manipulated these chaps into participating in this. Now, I'm talking about 12 guys were in this room, in the lounge room when I walked in. So when you think about that, that's quite a lot of people that he's manipulated, and he's prepped them, and he's created this whole scenario, and then he's brought her in, and she's had a drink, and then that's happened. Now, I did tell her what I walked in on, and so that she knew. But also, I spoke with those other men, and the people that I started with, people that I was really shocked that they were participating, and they became quite shocked when they started to repeat it back, because they did realize that it actually didn't sound right when talking with me. And what I began to learn, and this was a very significant period of time, was that by actually getting these men to commit an act of rape,
Yes.
he now has something over them. And this is later on, this is showing up in the future, and I've been able to recognize it, right? So in talking to these men, I realized that this chap had something over them. And if it had gone ahead, he would be able to say, well, you raped someone. We pack raped her. So what that meant was he was buying their silence. He was creating an opportunity to also get their silence so that he could operate more freely, openly, raping other women. And this expansive network of these other chaps, right?
Yes.
And they would defend him. They would do it because they had a secret that they were trying to keep hidden, that they were ashamed of. And so, you know, that meant that I put a cogwash on that too. But the reason I was safe was because I didn't sleep with a lot of people and write myself off. There's no way he could have proceeded in front of me or included me, because no one else would have bought that.
Yeah.
So,
Michelle, do you think that men understand that if a woman is drunk or on drugs, then she cannot give consent? Do you think people understand
this is a grey area, and it's not just men, because as I point out in my book, women rape.
Yes.
Not as many. And I've given a couple of examples in there. I know that has actually happened. And I've spoken with those women. That's why I've included them. But no, I don't think that we as a community or as a society educate our sons and daughters, right? So they don't realize that they actually could get into a lot of trouble by actually engaging in sex with someone that's willing. Now, they could be quite intoxicated themselves. So I guess it kind of goes two ways, where neither is capable of consent. And that's a little bit of a problem there. But you see, what's really important is that rapists don't want consent, right?
No, I know.
Consent. So when you think about it, consent isn't going to stop rape. And that's why I said earlier, we will not reduce the number of rapes or sexual assaults by having a universal or consistent law around consent. We merely enable people who have been raped to know it for sure. I have to say, there's been so many people who've said, oh, he said, well, I went over to his house, so I knew what I was in for. Now, no, you didn't know. And it's like, so I've heard this story for years, different versions of it. But he's doing things to me, and I'm telling him no, and I'm pulling his hand away, and he's pushing me against a wall or onto a sofa or somewhere else, and he's pulled my clothes down, and and then and I'm saying no. But then my friends say he's right because you went over there, or he's saying that, and I don't know what to think. Now, this unfortunately actually is a state of mind, and these people, firstly, you go into shock, and it takes when once you've been assaulted, you're still in shock, and it takes several weeks for the shock to wear off. And as it wears off, the cold hard fact sort of comes in, and you want to disbelieve it. You want it to not happen, because it's really hard to digest that, right? And so it's hard. But this is where you become incongruent within yourself, because you don't want to have been raped, but at the same time you know you were, and you try to talk yourself out of it, but you know you were. And so you get these bits of yourself, you start to fracture as a person, as a personality, right? If you've got a really clear understanding about what consent is, you know absolutely, and you've been raised on it, or you've really learnt it, then you know absolutely that it was, but you also can think about it differently than we would now, right? So right now it's sort of something that we don't tell people that's happened, because we're ashamed or we're shocked and we don't know what to think. Other people's reactions mean that we think something that's not correct. And
Yeah.
the first time you're raped, you don't know better. And the first time you're raped, I've never met anyone except a couple of people who actually were sort of able to you know, try to fight, but the others have all been
Frozen.
It's not the next time that you go to be raped that women have said, oh, I was able to sort of struggle and run, or I tried to fight him off, I couldn't. But the first time you're raped, you will typically freeze. And then you can't speak. And so if you don't understand what consent is, then you blame yourself. So that's
because
why
you didn't say no.
Yeah.
Okay.
You didn't say yes, and that's what's more important. You have to say yes. You do. You have to say yes. And that's why in the book I included that first experience that I had where it was a scientific experiment and I actually had sex for the first time to see what sex was, because I didn't know what it was. So I'd had sexual assault here, but I didn't know what this one was. And so by having this one, it put all the knowledge that I had here, well, it gave different context that I suddenly was able to begin to link to and realize that sex is in a box way over here on its own and sexual assault is in a box way over here on its own. They are miles apart. They are not the same thing. I had this debate, Susan Kendall, who has for years been a social worker in sexual assault, you know, and I say, it's not sex. And she says, well, actually it is. And I said to her, well, yes, Susan, it's a sexual act. I said, but it's not sex as we know it. And she's like, yeah, no, that's right. It's not sex as we know it, although it's a sexual act. But it's an act that is designed to destroy you. Whereas sex is something that is for a fun time. And so we've got to think fun, misery. Fun, misery.
Yes.
Right? So we need consent. We need consent to be really specific and consistent so that when it happens to us, we can go, I said no, you raped me, and can go into a police station and say, I said no.
Yeah.
And not, I
said
no, but he kept going. Well, did you stop him? No, I froze. Because we haven't had education around as a society, this is right. We don't understand our own responses. So here I am sitting in this group at the Royal North Sexual Assault Unit. Saying, he planned that, and these women are looking at me like, what do you mean? And I'm like, he planned that. And there's one of the people there was a very wealthy man. He's not with us anymore. He's not in this world anymore. And she was struggling. She was blaming herself. She hated herself because she put herself in a dangerous situation. And I said, you didn't. You didn't. He uses his confidence, which he has because he was extremely wealthy and well-known, to make you feel comfortable. And then he manages to get you alone so that he can rape you. And I stepped her through it. I can't give a lot of detail, or it would give people talking about. But I stepped her through it, and she suddenly had this different perspective of what actually happened to her. To what she knew she'd been raped, but she was blaming herself for putting herself in a position. She didn't realize she was maneuvered into that position expertly. She didn't put herself. She can't read anyone's mind. We can't read their minds. You know, we just can't. So we need consent as a way of us knowing what's happened to us and really understanding what's happened to us and to use in court. So we can say, especially here in Australia, where, like I said, there's not a lot of folks telling the truth. I did not consent to this rape. We need to be able to say that. To be able to do that, we need to understand that. Yeah. So I think that that's very important. Well, sorry, Toni. I think it's very important about understanding sexual assault and sex different, and sexual predators do not want your consent. They want you to say no. They want you to freeze because that's what they do it for, right? They want you to fight. They want you to try and run. That's why they do it. If you didn't do
Michelle,
that,
is it about power in those instances? Is it wrapped up in a power play? Because often you hear that sexual assault is about the power. Is that true?
yeah, look, yeah, I'm going to share a little story with you. This will give you perspective on this. Okay, so I think I've shared it with you a little bit already, but I went out to the last chap who'd sexually assaulted me, you know, and he was all boo-hoo when his wife was there and very sad and very apologetic. But as he was walking out the door, and he was smiling, when he was telling me what he had done to me when I was asleep and I didn't know what he was doing to me, he got an erection telling me this, and he was salivating. He enjoyed reliving it. And he was looking at me, waiting for me to fall apart and be vulnerable and broken. Now, this particular predator, one of the other people I identified, right? And I was talking to her. He had harassed and harassed and harassed her on the phone relentlessly. She was hiding in the back of Whoop Whoop when I actually reached out to her family, and then she didn't even have a phone because he tracked her down. He was on no register for anything. She had literally, at the age of 18, dropped off. She wasn't working. The only people who knew she existed was Social Security. That is terrible. Once he'd finished his 12 months in jail, 12 months weekend jail, I started phone calls, heavy breathing and laughing and carrying on. I knew his voice, right? But definitely the heavy breathing. And so I ring the police. Now they tell me, oh, it's probably him. So then I say, can you ring him and tell him to stop? Oh, we have no evidence it's him. So no, we can't accuse him of something. He served his time. So now we've wiped the slate clean. Okay, so someone's harassing me. Can you please tap the phone? Oh, no, we know who it is. So we're not going to waste our money. I said, you know who it is, and you know it's bothering me, and you know that it's going to keep doing it, but you can't investigate it because A, it would cost too much and I'm not worth it, and B, he served his time. So you can't touch him. Is that what you're saying? Absolutely ridiculous, right? So does that give you a perspective on the fact that they like you to suffer? Yeah. And if you kill someone, you're dead. That's it. The only way that you can hook in suffering is the relatives that those people leave behind. But if you leave someone alive after you completely and utterly obliterate them, and you watch them, and you can have control of pulling the strings, and hearing
it is
other people about how they fall apart. How powerful is that? How powerful. Now, I gave another example in the book where this chap was in the Philippines, and over there we all had drivers. We weren't allowed to drive. So he was within this group. Every weekend they'd go out, they'd get, they'd have drinks. The men would drink, the women would drink, and they'd all pile into cars. And he would get in beside someone, and he would put his finger inside them and rub himself in the car with her husband sitting on the other side. Or he would reach through to get something, and he would slip his hand under the person sitting in the front seat or play with their breast. Or if his arms were crossed, he would slide it. And their husbands are sitting in the car. I mean, how amazingly empowering is that for somebody? That they can do that, and that person they're doing it to is powerless to stop them. Can you imagine the high that they get from that? that would be very addictive. Very, very addictive. So yeah,
Dear, oh
if you
dear.
can understand why they do it, because when people say, oh yeah, they want power over you, but when you say those words, what does that actually mean to each of us as just those words? Power. What's
It's
power
very
over another?
empowering.
If you
It's
don't
very
know a concept, you
disempowering.
don't know how to make it, understand it, right?
Yeah,
So just imagine
yeah.
that. Just imagine in the dark, and he's playing with himself. He's fingering a woman, or he's got his hand on her breast and he's fingering her, and she's there, and her husband's sitting on the other side, and there might be another husband crammed in there, and there's a woman sitting in the front, and there's a driver. And if it's in a van, there's a whole lot more people, and there were a lot of vans over there that the expats used to travel in. And so you imagine if you've got a whole van full of people, and he's able to just assault each and every single one of them of his choosing. When, you know, it's sort of
So,
like,
Michelle, if women
how
freeze in that instance, is there really anything that they can do?
yes, there's one important thing that they can do, and that's
Yes.
once it's over, they need to say to themselves, and it's in my book all the way through it, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. Right?
And it's not.
It was not my fault. I didn't ask for that. He raped me. I accept that. Acceptance comes first.
Yeah.
And then you can move on to acknowledgement, and then forgive. I could not read his mind, so I forgive myself if I'm blaming myself. I forgive myself.
Okay.
Now, there's a I think I talked about it a little bit last week, but the way in which our psychology works, there is a feedback process we have, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
we're feeding back to ourselves experiences. And so when we feed back, this is sort of an area where we can almost create blame. Oh, I wasn't picking my feet up, so I stubbed my toe. Okay, I stubbed my toe, right? So this is where we get into this process of evolving and having this, oh, I did this because this is the feedback, right? If someone tickles you, someone else did, right? So, but where we get into this process of having a, okay, I went to that party, so that person raped me from that party, I put myself there, the feedback comes back as I did this, right? So understand the process that happens unconsciously. So we must forgive ourselves, because we cannot read someone's mind. We did not go out knowing we were going to be assaulted. We did not walk into our lounge room knowing that someone was hiding in the closet. We did not do anything knowing that this was going to happen. So we must forgive that unconscious process of self-blame. So we say,
Michelle,
I accept I'm raped, I forgive myself, and it's not my fault. That's what you can do.
I was just going to say, the number of times I've had conversations with girlfriends and women who have told me of instances where they were sexually assaulted, and following on from that, they have said, I shouldn't have been walking home alone. I shouldn't have been in the dark. My skirt was too short. And in those instances, we need more people saying to them, this is not your fault. You should not be raped while you walk home. You should not be raped because of what you wear. You should not be raped because you had a few more drinks than you intended. Women,
that's right.
Include men in this as well, but women in particular should be safe to walk where they need to walk, to go where they need to go. They should not anticipate that that will end up in them being raped.
That's right. And you can't anticipate it. You can't live your life constantly, right? That is not healthy. You would have so much cortisol running through your body. Well, people who have been do, and it creates illness. So you can't mind read. So consent gives people the ability to be able to say, I did nothing. Now, I was talking with a woman who was snatched. Now, this is something I've spoken to a lot of people, but this woman in particular I'm going to talk about. She was grabbed over a concrete fence, walking towards a train station on a public street, a street she walked down every day to go to work.
Yep.
And there was some bushes, and 2 men grabbed her and they raped her, right? Now, she could not tell her husband or her sons. She could not speak to them hardly. She could not sleep in the same room as her husband, and she couldn't tell him why. Because it was, what did I do? I must have done something, right? We have to remember, and we come back to this again and again and again.
Yes.
Sexual assault of any form, regardless of the penetration or the non-penetration or whatever it is, whether it's someone's finger or whether it's something else, sexual assault is not something that is within our reasonable or normal realm of awareness or thinking.
Understand.
We have no knowledge of it. It does not make sense to us. So when we're confronted with something that is so far outside anything that we've ever experienced before, what do we do with that? Well, first of all,
exactly.
but there aren't any, because no one's been talking about this, which is the reason why I stepped up to talk about it.
Yes.
And the thing is that we need to know. We need to know so that when it happens, we know that it's not us. It's got nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
It's the other person. They chose it. They set the trap. Whether we walked into it there or a different time, they've made a decision and it's all about them, right? It's really important to know that. It's not your skirt. It's not your time of day. It's not anything. It's just simply be aware of what consent is. Know that you didn't give it. And then
you can't and you cannot give it if you're drunk or drug impaired. You can't. So if you think that that's an excuse for assault, it's not. It never is. And if we talk about a current situation in Australia around the Brittany Higgins story, she did not give consent. Therefore, it's rape. It's simple, isn't it?
No. It's been a great get out of jail free card for a very long time.
Oh,
it's in my book. I've got an example of where a girl was raped, and he used, I was drunk and you should have said something. You should have made yourself clearer. But I outline it very clearly that I've outlined his trap there in the book very clearly, that whole scenario was actually painting a picture for her so he could say that and get away with it, right? And that example of hunting that are drunk, see, that rapist that I was talking about that got all those men, right?
Yes.
There's another example at a university in Adelaide, 2 years ago. The girl was drunk.
Yes.
By actually getting other men involved in it, it's like there's a whole lot of people saying, yeah, no, she did say yes, or yeah, no, we were all drunk, or it wasn't rape, because these people over here in this category, they're not rapists.
Yes.
They wouldn't have. They got pulled into something that they wouldn't ordinarily have gone into. This person wants people that are going to support him and protect him. One of the ways of doing that is to get secrets on this group of men, so that sometimes you get a whole pack, like the other example I gave on the train, or the ones in the booth, or there's other examples that I can give, where you get a whole group of men that are like-minded. There was a situation where some paramedics actually found each other. 3 rapists found each other. They were all paramedics. And there were a lot of girls reporting they were being assaulted between where they got picked up and the hospital. And so they were actually raping taking turns. One would drive, the others would rape, and they spun it around. But but of course, all three of them said, "No, that never happened. It's 3 against 1." So sometimes they do find each other, but other times
Wow.
they look for people to manipulate to give them support. The other thing that happens is, and this is something very recent. I was talking to a young girl, she's 25 years of age, and was raped. And she was sitting talking with a friend of hers, and, who's no longer a friend of hers, but she was sharing the story with me. And then I was talking with her about this. But this friend, her ex-boyfriend had been accused of rape.
Right.
And this friend was defending him. And this girl says to me, "Why was she defending him?" I said, "If you hadn't been raped, you'd have been defending him too." Because she knew him.
Yeah.
Because her friend dated him.
Yeah.
But I don't understand my friend. Why? And I said, because he will get a girlfriend and he will behave in a gentlemanly fashion. And this has happened a lot. They'll almost wait for the girl to instigate sex so that girl thinks that she's in control. And then he will rape other women. And then she'll be like, "No, he didn't rape you. No, I know him. He never tried anything. In fact, I had to be the one to do it. He was so respectful." Right? And
that doesn't
I said to
mean
this
that
girl,
he's not.
He's definitely a rapist. Because there was more details to it. But I said to her,
Yes.
if you hadn't been raped, would you be seeing him differently? And she said no. She could acknowledge that no. She'd seen the gentleman side of him. But in talking to the girl who stepped up and said he raped me, because she'd been raped, she understood the language that this girl was using, because she now was familiar with that language, because that's the language she was using. And there's things about rape that people who've been raped know that other people don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
And
There's a
yeah. But this is another way in which rapists will
behaviors
actually use the environment to manipulate dialogue. So this is how they use that.
Isn't there, Michelle? There's behaviors in
but they use
any five.
I'm tracing the line.
Beautiful scenery, Michelle.
Yeah, it's my fig tree. It's down the back of my property.
It is lovely.
Yeah, I just
there are
like this to
behaviors. Yeah, it looks very, very beautiful, that background. In talking about this really tough subject, there are behaviors that are similar or the same in all of these perpetrators, particularly those that rape. I think we've got about 5 minutes before I want to get onto some of the things that you're doing in the background, but yes, we've talked that much. Can you just quickly point out for the women and men listening that some of those key personality types that you could recognize if you knew what to look for and be aware of around the types of personalities and the things that they do that manipulate people to get them into that point where someone will be raped?
Okay, so listen to what they're saying.
Yes.
If they're saying something like, "Oh, look at her, she puts herself out. She might be a bit drunk and she's got a short skirt." So then the other men around him will think that. And that's laying the foundation. Or, "Oh, she's coming on to me." Or, when in actual fact, if you actually really paid attention, but you just believe what he's saying.
Right.
But if you actually pay attention and see if what people are saying is actually what's really happening, rather than just accept it. The other thing is, girls, especially, but women, if you are hearing someone say, "He raped me," by gosh, you stay away from them, right? People don't necessarily, I know that some people make it up, and they'll usually go into the police station to make trouble with someone if they're making it up. They won't just say it generally. We hear about someone who's saying that person raped me, you stay away and observe and listen and see if anybody else is saying it, because I can guarantee you that if that person is a rapist, they've raped other people, and there's people out there that are saying it. So listen,
So,
observe, and actually question
Michelle, is
what
that
people are
why?
thinking.
Michelle, is that why when sometimes there's quite big sensationalized cases, one person comes out and it triggers an avalanche of others saying this happened to me, and they're just
Yeah.
actually lucky that it hasn't come out sooner?
Yeah, part of the reason why people don't report is the police attitude to some people, not all police, but some.
Correct.
The other reason they don't report is because they don't actually know whether they've been raped or not. And that's why consent
Yes.
is so important, that it's taught correctly, because it's not.
Yes. Yeah.
And the other thing is they don't report because of their environment.
Yes.
Because
And there's shame. There's shame
weren't-
around this.
you weren't raped, yeah, and we have a sexual assault culture at the moment, whereby it's always, well, what did you do? What did you do to cause that?
Yep.
Or what did you do to
Yep.
cause this? Or what did you do to make him do that? I'll chase the shade. Yeah. So if that's the case, then people can't actually they can't go in and report a rape, so they don't. But another thing is people are in so much shock because something that is outside the norm, and it's outside our reality and beyond. It's you can never understand it till it's happened, and then a lot of people still don't understand it then.
Yes.
So it can take weeks for the shock to wear off and the realization to hit, and then you shut down because you're horrified.
Yes.
So there's a process, and so this is why a lot of people internalize. So we've got the extroverts, we've got introverts. Introverts will internalize, so they'll be less likely to speak up straight away. Some people do go and find a counsellor and report, and at the Royal North Shore Sexual Assault Unit that I was at, Susan would always report to police the names so that they could build a list, and they did. And they would often reach out and say, okay, we've had someone come into the police station and they're saying that this chap's assaulted them. Could you reach out to your person and see if they would like to join forces now that there's somebody else to support them? Right? So then that way, police have actually managed with 3 or 4 or 5 women, to take 5 people to court and put someone away for rape. And
Michelle,
this is difficult. It's difficult because there's work to be done in all these areas, but that is generally why they don't report.
it's not usually a one-off crime, though, is it? My understanding from the research and reading.
Serial offenders. Just think of it this way. I know that the law calls them perpetrators, so they've perpetrated a criminal offence. But think about them like I write about them, as predators. They hunt.
Yes. Yeah.
No, we used to hunt to eat, right? To kill, to eat. Generations, right? So just think about it like that. They have to eat. They have to eat a certain thing. And so they hunt. And once they start, they get really good at it. And you will never probably, I would say you were never the first and you won't be the last. There is a first, there is a last. But by the time someone's 19, 20, they're well on their way, by the time they're 25, 26, really good. By the time they're in their 30s and 40s, man, how many lives have they just
I'm conceptualizing some of the cases that are in the media.
I'll just say here, the only time it's a one-off is if it's a grey area. And that's in my book. And those men have raped, and I've given some examples there, but they didn't actually mean to. They think about it, and they didn't double check that it was okay, and they have raped, but
Right.
it was not something that they would ordinarily do. However, they've believed their own press for some reason, or one,
Yeah.
whatever, got sucked into something like that pack rape, for example. But those men,
Yes.
other than the one, wouldn't ordinarily ever rape somebody, and it's not
Okay.
something they'd want to do. I've spoken with men who, and because I've raised this with groups of men over the years, this
Yes.
whole scenario
Yes.
around this,
Mhm.
and a couple of blokes are like, "Oh yeah, I know. Actually, I know. Someone tried that on with me, but nah." The other guys in the group, but yeah, no, I just didn't think that was right, and
Okay.
they weren't happy about it afterwards either. That was not what that other person had talked them into. It was not that
Yes.
at all, and they realised that too late. So there is that grey area where they're either set up, or they get pulled into something that they didn't want to be in, or they've had sex
Yeah.
with someone. They haven't been careful enough, so it's definitely rape, but
Yeah.
it's not something they would typically do, and therefore they're not a predator. They're just
Yes.
somebody
Yes.
that's they've made a
So there's
mistake,
quite a
but
bit of
destroyed someone's life. So
yes.
the
The
you've got to
impact
be
is the
careful.
same, though, isn't it? The impact is the
The
same
impact
on a
is
victim,
absolutely
though.
the same. Makes no
Yeah.
difference. Although, I mean, I've never been. There was that one example that I give in my book where I was about to be raped by someone who thought I wanted to have sex with
Yes.
him until I told him I
Yes.
didn't. So I don't really know, other than that experience, how much different it is, but it is still
Mhm.
extremely upsetting. And if you've never ever had sex, or if you've never been raped before, that would be horrendous. And even if you have been raped before, that
Yes.
would be horrendous.
It's still horrendous.
It's horrendous because it's against your will. Their
Yes.
intention's different, but the act itself is not. It's perhaps
Yeah.
it's still quite violent if you can't stop them. If you freeze, and this is where a lot of people say,
Yes.
but and this is where this big grey area is. Well, you never said,
Yeah.
so I didn't know that you didn't want to, and I continued because I thought you were into it. Well, no,
If
you
you're not
can't let that be
responding,
anymore. That means
yeah.
you're
Yeah.
frozen,
Yeah.
and that means you didn't
Yes.
want it. Yeah, yeah,
And that means you're
and that has
traumatized, and that's not okay.
and that's where consent comes in, because it wipes out the grey area. And it completely makes it clear that if you are agreeable, what you're agreeable to, what you're
Mm.
knowledgeable about, what you're
Yeah.
accepting, what you're, that wipes all of that out, and it makes it very clear. So
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
I was
Yeah. Yeah.
agreeable. No, I was not. And then it becomes very, very level playing
Yeah.
field, very clear, because at the moment it's
Yeah.
very muddy. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Just
there's,
because
as you
of that
said
grey
before,
area.
there's and we don't have a clear definition of consent anywhere specifically, and that leads to part of the problem. There's a lot of information about what it is and what it isn't, but we don't have it set in law, do we, Michelle? Not at the moment in Australia, at least we don't.
Well, there's not a lot of information out there actually about
Yeah.
what it isn't, because too many people
Yeah.
are questioning, was I raped or
Yeah.
not? Did I ask for this? I
Yeah.
didn't want it, but whose fault
Yeah.
was it? And so
Yeah.
it's not well known. And like
No.
even today on websites, I've got to tell people, yeah, you were raped and this is why.
Yeah.
Because they don't know. Because
Michelle,
we have been
yeah.
an irresponsible society. We didn't teach it.
Yes.
But then here's the
Yes.
thing, Toni. If you go on government websites and you look at who's actually involved in shaping policy, it's same old, same old. And if they
Yeah.
don't know any better, they can't shape something that's
That's
going to
exactly
create
right.
change.
Mm.
So,
Exactly
we're
right.
not, you do the best you can with what you got, but there's a point where we have to look at changing the way in which we frame things and do things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And on
So
that
did you make
note,
that clear?
we are actually out of time.
No,
Again.
no. Oh no. Oh, okay.
Time. So what we're going to do, so next week, because of Easter, we're going to have a break, but then we'll come back with 3 more subsequent shows with Michelle, and we've got a lot planned in the next 3 shows to talk about, lots more to talk about in this difficult area to discuss. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on Radio Toni and making Insight a really wonderful show full of information. Don't forget to reach out and talk to Michelle. She has amazing insight. And remember, that's the name of her book. So she's done lots of work in this area. She's very helpful. We're also going to mention in upcoming shows about how you can work with Michelle to work through some of this trauma and clear it out of your life. Michelle and our listeners, that's our lot for this week. Michelle, thank you very much. Beautiful fig tree background and a wonderful stage for talking about this difficult subject. We will be back after the Easter break for the following Sunday, back talking with Michelle. This is Toni Lontis, and that's your lot for this week. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in. Bye.